Welcome back. So much of the time, canned conditional formats, like the ones we saw in the last video, are all we need to add that extra level of meaning to our data. But there are also times when we need a custom solution that Excel's pre-configured solutions just don't have an answer for. The good news is, we are totally free to roll our own conditional formats and conditional formatting criteria. So let's walk through a couple of examples where this might be useful. For starters, let's say we just want to flag any cells with an SLA less than 75% in our pivot table here, point blank period. Otherwise, we don't want to apply any additional formatting. So to do this, I'll select any cell adjacent to one of our states, and then hit our conditional formatting button, and then hover over our Highlight Cells Rules option in our conditional formatting dropdown. Now, because we're highlighting a number, we get 4 options here specific to numbers: greater than, less than, between, or equal to. Now, we want to call out values that are less than 75%, so we'll choose that option. And now for our value, we'll enter 0.75, and we'll go with Excel's default recommendation of light red fill with dark red text. So then I'll click OK. And we don't see anything happen because our particular selected cell is not under 75%. But let's click our little contextual button here and then apply our rule to all cells in this column other than the grand total. And now scrolling down through our pivot, it looks like all of those cells with an SLA less than 75% have in fact been called out. And then real quick, we can do the same thing for the region level of our pivot. So again, highlight cells rules, less than 0.75. And then we'll modify that to look at all of our labels and not just the selected one. And looking at our various subtotals, that appears to have worked as well because the one subtotal under 75% has been highlighted. Now let's say, for example, we're not totally satisfied with the color format that Excel chose for us. We can always go back into our rule and edit these formats if we so choose. So I can again hit our conditional formatting button, choose Manage Rules, and then I'll just select one here to edit it. And I'll point out before we move on that we're again taken to this same Edit Formatting Rule dialog box that we've already seen multiple times. So at this point, you're probably realizing that all of these shortcuts you see from the conditional formatting button on the ribbon really just take you to different configurations of this exact same Edit Formatting Rule dialog box. So in this particular case, what we're doing is editing the formatting that's being applied. So we'll click this Format button at the very bottom. And I think I'll leave the fill color the same, but I'll change the font color to simply be black. And then click OK. And then I'll do the same thing for our second rule. And then click OK again, and then apply. And now we see that our formatting is still applied, but the font color is now the default of black. Now, the conditional formatting we've applied thus far is arguably not all that interesting. But now let's add a little bit of nuance. Let's say that while any low SLAs are bad, we especially care about them when they're tied to a state or region that has had lots of calls. Say at least 1,000. But now we're applying formatting based on values in a different column. So we want to apply our conditional format to our orders with an SLA measure, but based in part on the value in a completely different column. There's no single click of a button that can help us here. We'll actually need to use a formula as our criteria. So let's see how that works. So the first step, as usual, is to select a cell in our measure column and then hit the conditional formatting button. And now, because the rule we're applying is sufficiently complex, we can't use any of these shortcuts. So instead, we'll just select New Rule. And that takes us back to this familiar dialog box. And now, as I mentioned, we're going to use a formula to determine our conditional format, so we'll select that option. And just thinking through our logic, what we really want here is to apply our format if the value in our orders with an SLA column is less than 0.75 and the value in our order count column is greater than 1,000. So to apply multiple criteria where all of them need to be true, we can simply use the AND function. So we'll type equals and then we'll just select cells in our pivot table to build out the criteria. So first we'll select D4 here and say less than 0.75. And then our second criteria will be that C4 is greater than 1,000. And now for our format, I think I'll make the cell font that dark red that we saw earlier. So I'll change our format to that and click OK. And then before we exit our formatting rule dialog box, I'll make sure that I'm applying this rule to all cells within this particular level of hierarchy in our pivot. And then I'll click OK. And scrolling down through our pivot, even for an example like New Jersey, where there were more than 1,000 orders and our SLA is less than 75%, we don't see our new font formatting. So let's go back into the rule. So we'll choose Manage Rules, and then edit our rule. And now if we look at the formula for our conditional formatting rule, we see the problem. The cell references in our formula are absolute, as denoted by the $signs before both the column and row reference. Because of this, our rule is only being applied to cell D4 out of all the cells in our orders with an SLA column. So to fix this, all I have to do is remove the $signs from these cell references so that the references are relative and apply to all the cells in our column equally. So now I'll click OK and then Apply, and lo and behold, if we look at our row for New Jersey, which again meets our additional criteria, we now see that dark red font color applied. So now we've basically got two different layers of rules in play. One that applies to all cells where our percent with an SLA is less than 75%. And then a second one that only kicks in if that first condition is true and our order count is greater than 1,000. So even though we didn't specify both pieces of logic in both rules, both formatting rules are applying to our cell for New Jersey here. Now that happy state of affairs will not always be the case. So if I go back into our rules and then switch the order of our rules. So let's say I move this rule that we most recently created to the bottom by clicking this down arrow here and then click Apply. Suddenly our special formatting for New Jersey disappears. So what's happening here is, if there is some level of conflict between the formatting applied by our different rules to the same cell, whatever formatting is applied by a rule that comes first wins. So our first two formats say, apply a font color of black. And then our last rule says, apply a font color of dark red. Well, if we're in a cell where both of these rules apply, the formatting of the rule that comes first in this list wins. So what this should tell you is that more specific criteria, like the one that we just built based on a formula, should generally come first, and broader criteria should come later. So if I move our new rule, our formula-based rule, back to the top and then click Apply, our formatting for New Jersey reappears. Again, that's because our font color for that particular rule is winning out, even though the conditions for another rule are also met for that particular cell. Now, if you want to play it safe and keep the various styles you're applying mutually exclusive, such that only one set of styles is ever applied, you can use this Stop If True option over here on the right. So that basically says, if all of these conditions for a particular rule are true, don't bother trying to apply any formatting from any other rules. The trick here would be to make sure that each set of conditions is comprehensive and mutually exclusive. Alright. Now, while conditional formatting is a straightforward and highly effective way to add a data visualization component to your pivot tables, we've yet to explore Excel's most powerful technique for guiding your end users to insights about their data: charts. We'll begin our exploration of charts in the next video. I'll see you then.